What you're about to watch is the first part of a two-part discussion on biodynamics. The following hour deals with the principles of biodynamics and how it all started, and how these winemakers think when they apply these practices. There's also another part to this discussion in combination with Rosa Creer, a famous viticulturist from South Africa, and Johan Reineke, who farms biodynamically for the past 15 years on his farm just outside Stellenbosch in South Africa. That is another discussion. Enjoy.
Time I gave a lecture about biodynamics was 10 years ago, to the date almost, in 2010. And since then, the topic has really ignited sort of an interest. Although I have a background in wine science, I did a BSc and an MSc in wine chemistry. In 2014, I visited the domain of Anne-Claude Leflevre in Burgundy, which obviously was wonderful. Her assistant wrote a book about biodynamics, Antoine Lepetit. He wrote a book about biodynamics. And then in 2015, I was the guest for a week in the house in Bordeaux of May-Hélène de Lenquesang, which is the owner of Glenelly and the previous owner of Pichon Longueville, Comtesse de Lalande. And in 2016, she's a good friend of mine, and in 2016, she asked that I would please commit one day in my life to spread the message of the principles of biodynamics. And now, 4 years later, I'm slowly but surely getting into that direction. I've also, over the past few years, spent a lot of time with Rosa and Johan, and that has also helped a little bit. And I only drink wine from people that I like. So that is a summary of my background on biodynamics. This lecture has got a bit of a different approach. I'm not going to speak about the preparates actually at all. I'm going to talk about the principles and how it actually came to be about. So you might wonder, why am I talking about carrots and beetroots? And I'm only going to be able to give you a definition right at the end of this conversation. The talk is about an hour long, and I will give you only a definition right at the end. Let's start. So I would like to say and start by saying that nowadays, everyone seems to have a passion for wine. Everyone is talking about it. We open bottles, we contemplate about it, we taste it, we retaste it, we calculate about what we're drinking, we're wondering, we're pondering, we question, we analyze, and this is happening through all professions and through all social classes. We are all talking about wine, and we all have a conversation about it around the dinner table. What we are tasting really sharpens our senses, and it's triggering our emotions. And what we are trying to understand is another world, an intangible world, that of aromas and of senses and of harmonies and of balances. And this is a very fragile world. It reveals to us very shyly, very discreetly, and very subtly through something like matter. Now, I would like to start just by talking about the concept of AOC. Hélène Puissant, she's joining in from France and Burgundy, where she's a lecturer and a viticulturist winemaker in Burgundy. She would know this picture very well. The AOC, or the seal that you see here, is the highest tier of wine quality in France. It's the symbol or the stamp to say that this wine comes from a specific site or a specific terroir. What it actually means is that the roots of the vines planted there is married to the soil. It receives through its leaves the climatic condition, the information, and it expresses a place. So what it aims to do, this seal, is to talk to us about the accumulated knowledge that has been gained over centuries to talk about a sense of place. Keep that in mind, because I'm going to refer to this concept throughout. Now I would like to speak to you about what is happening on Earth. There's a force on Earth. The planet Earth is subject to a force. It's called gravity, and gravity has got power over all living human beings, everything that lives on the face of the earth. Fortunately, this force is counterbalanced by another force. In the West, we refer to it as solar attraction, and to the East, we talk about the force of levitation. It is light. It talks about a state of weightlessness. Now, we see both of these two forces in physical terms. We talk about the earth, and in physical terms, we talk about heat. Now, in terms of gravity, gravity is what makes rain fall. It's what makes you feel heavy after a long day's labor. But when you go to bed at night and you sleep, the next morning you feel levitated as the sun wakes you up. So you feel a faintness, you feel refreshed. And so that, yeah. So I can also explain this in terms of, let's take a metal, for example. When I heat a metal, it turns eventually at very high temperatures, it turns into a liquid, which eventually will turn into a gas. So what we are doing is we are delivering the metal from its weight. This process actually reveals the impermanence of matter in a physical world, where it jumps between something that you can see and something that you can't see. Now, so we have these two opposite forces. We have gravity towards the center of the earth, and we have heat, which is a force of levitation towards the sun. We also have two intermediate phases, of which the first one is water. Water, I just want to close the door. Water is a liquid. It's an intermediate state. Water is an intermediate state between the earth and the heat. It's sort of halfway, it's stuck in the middle, you can say. We experience a sense of weightlessness when we go swimming because we are 90% water, to give you an example. Water turns as hard as rock when it gets cold, and it evaporates when it gets warm. So can you see that water is sort of stuck in the middle? Also, it's important to note that no life on Earth is possible without passing through a state of water in the first place. We have a fourth phase, which is the light phase. Light comes to us through air. Beyond our atmosphere, things are pretty dark and opaque, but light is still subject to gravity. Now, plants relate to each of these four states in terms of their roots, their leaves, their capacity to flower, and their fruit phase. I can also write it in a different way, where plants refer to the earthly state through the forces of gravity in its roots, to the water state in its leaves, in the light states in its capacity to bloom, and warmth in its power to fruit. Now, plants have established these relationships with extreme originality. And I'm going to give you a few examples. Let's take the lily. We are talking about plants that express themselves in one of these four states. A plant whose nature is to develop a strong affinity with the light, in other words, to bloom, will absorb light much better, and it will express it in its bloom. This is an example of the lily. If it didn't have the strong affinity with light, its power to bloom would be much less. Let's take grains or cereals, for example. They are intimately related to heat, and thus their capacity to bear fruit, or in this case, seeds. We know that when we sow a seed of grain, it can multiply 100-fold. So the fruit character dominates. And if you look at the plant of a grain or a cereal, it actually does all that it can to move towards the sun. The roots are very shallow. It's almost negligent. The leaves are irrelevant. So it moves as straight up in the air as possible to reach the sun. But now, Mother Nature is very creative and intuitive, and she can throw the puzzle around a bit. So now things get a bit more complicated. So this grain makes sense because it expresses itself in the way that it looks. It grows very upright, and the seeds are at the top. But let's take carrots, for example. Is a root really supposed to be yellow and have lots of flavor and a little bit of sugar? So a carrot, strictly speaking, aren't supposed to be sweet and the color of orange. So it uses its floral capacity to fragrance the roots and to color the roots. The sweetness is supposed to be in the fruit, but it's stored in the carrot. This is an example of an atypical plant. Another example of an atypical plant is citronella. It stores its very strong taste and the smell in its leaves, although it was meant for the fruit. Cinnamon is another example. It stores those similar tastes, not in the fruit or in the flower. It stores it in the bark. The same we can say from beetroot, where it stores the sugar in the root, except for then in the fruit. Now, these atypical plants are the principle of medicinal plants, of which one, it heals one through its atypical characteristics. They will activate a process that is normally situated elsewhere. So these healing properties is the virtue of being atypical. Now, why is this important to understand? To understand why these could heal humans, we must understand that humans are also subjected to one of these 4 states. We call it temperaments or states, where one state is always dominant. If you are a human, you probably have one of these 4 states, that dominates. The one in the top left corner is a choleric personality. These are things used by psychiatrists and psychologists, and it was taught as an ancient doctrine by Hippocrates in 460 before Christ. An example of this is a choleric type of personality. It refers to heat because they're always ready to explode. This person refers to the sanguine type, which represents air, as they are always ready to move. This person is a melancholic type of personality. They have a deep connection with the earth, and there's always almost an underlying note of sadness and nostalgia. Where this guy, I'd be happy to spend some time with, he represents phlegmatic, which is the water, and he represents a very stable personality as he floats through life. Now, Hippocrates believed that illness comes from an imbalance in a certain part of the body. Now, herbal medicine aims to bring a remedy by presenting a plant, prescribing a specific plant which embodies this connection. I hope this is starting to make sense. So the plant becomes the link in a very dynamic process. Let's take this, for example. This is the stinging nettle that is actually used as one of the preparations in biodynamics. Now, let's quickly talk about the principle of this plant. It is completely focused at its center. Its roots are very shallow. The flowers are spread throughout the length of the stalk, as you can see. But the fruit is basically insignificant. But the leaves are transparent and they shimmer. They have a floral scent and they sting. So the function of the nettle is that it draws all of these characteristics towards the center of the plant, where normally other plants express this at their extremities. So this is a central type of plant. So that's why we connect something like the nettle, which represents something in human terms like the heart organ, because your heart is seen as the center of your body. Now, every plant is pulled into 2 directions, either towards the sun or towards the center of the earth by gravity. Now, the Greeks symbolized this in terms of 2 different plants. The Greeks formulated this. They used the cypress to symbolize the upward direction for the force of levitation. And this is called an Apollonian plant. The reason why it's called an Apollonian plant is because Apollo was the god of the sun. And if you look at the shape of a cypress tree, it grows extremely upwards. Everything is motivated towards the sun. But for the earth characteristics, it's the vine that symbolizes the force of gravity towards the center of the earth. All forces are directed to the roots. It grows deeper and deeper. It tries to penetrate the soil. The vine has got an extreme connection with the earth. It's almost incapable of going upwards, which is why we are trellising our vineyards. It's called the Dionysian plant or a Dionysian simple because Dionysus was the god of the vine. This is a picture from Colares in Portugal. Colares is a region of Lisbon. Lisbon is the capital of Portugal, and these vines are very old. Can I ask that someone just mutes their microphone, please? So these vines, they grow in very sandy conditions, and their roots penetrate approximately 15 meters, 6 to 15 meters down into the center of the earth, because that's where the limestone bedrock is, and the roots are actually that deep. So at the end of spring, we see an almost desperate attempt by the vine to hurl itself up into the air. You almost feel like a sad shame, nostalgia for the vine. Shame, it's trying its best, but it's really struggling. Plants normally, this is an interesting picture, and I wonder how many of us actually in the wine industry think of this, because plants normally flower at the top of the shoot. Whereas in the vine, it's very hidden. It's hidden behind the leaves. And even when it starts to form, it curls almost downwards as you have to look for them. But even though flowers of the vine are small and discreet, we should never underestimate them and we should never misjudge them. So in all essence, the vine is a root plant, but it's the fruit that we are after. It is the fruit that creates 290,000 jobs in the Western Cape, that contributes 49 billion rand to the national GDP. It generates 9 billion rand in exports, and we pay 7 billion rand in tax. So it's the fruit that we're after, and this makes the vineyard an atypical plant. Now there's a question that we never ask in agriculture. Well, I've been lecturing for the past 16 years, or I've been involved with education, and this question is never ever asked because we are not taught like this in modern science. Now the question is, as wine growers, is it our task to give the vine means to emerge from its earthly prison by trellising it? Because remember, it's forced with gravity towards the center of the earth. So are we helping it by levitating it, by helping it upwards, by putting it on a trellis? Or should we perhaps spray a cypress infusion on the leaves? I'm not sure if any of you recognize this picture, but it is the cypress lane that leads to the town of Bolgheri in the Super Tuscan region of Italy. Or shall we help it in its task and strengthen its deep connection with the earth by pruning it and bringing it back down lower to the ground? This picture is from the Lodi vineyards in California. Those of you who's listening with children, you might as well, a similar comparison would be, to what extent do you as parent give or hold back to bring balance in your child's education? It's the same type of question that I'm asking here. This is from the same vineyard as the previous slide. It's a Cinsault vineyard that's 135 years old from Lodi in California. It's an old bush vine Cinsault. Now, of course, the viticulturist will consider the age of the vine, the type of soil, the latitude, the location, the slope, the wind direction, and he will use all of this also to make a decision that what is best for the vine. As long as these laws are respected, we can make an authentic wine that brings diversity. And isn't this a real sense of place, a real sense of AOC? And I think the more people are reflecting on this more and more, on this this introduction that I've now given you. And I wonder if this is not why winemakers are referring more and more to their vineyards, and we are spending less significance, we are placing less importance on the wines that are made in the cellar. We are all referring more to what's happening in the vineyards. Now, let's take another angle. Until the 1950s, not all wines were great, but they were at least authentic. We almost feel like a sad nostalgia for the real but bad wines made in those times. At least they were real. Since then, we've seen a lot of aesthetic intervention that makes pretty soulless wine with artificial measures. Now, in this category, we can find good but really false AOC wines, where it's just a symbol that's written on the label. This is an example of the date is 2018, where lots of AOC wines were actually a fraud. That's besides the point for now. So the question that we should ask ourselves is, how did we actually get here? How did we get to this point? Now, viticulture was approached by a very attractive product. It's called a herbicide. And herbicides herbicides are a very fun idea because it gets rid of weeds. Eben, Sadia, I think you're listening with Marcus. And Eben, if you're listening, you're welcome to comment. But whenever I speak to Eben during the summer or the spring, he says, yeah, it's this like continuous struggle, getting rid of weeds. So that man knows the struggle with weeds. He knows all weeds by the palm of his hand. So removing weeds from a vineyard is a very laborious task. It never stops, especially in summer and spring. So what a herbicide actually does, it destroys the microorganisms that is present in the roots. Now, a microorganism, it's called mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza is nothing like the intermediate for the roots to take up the nutrients in the soil. If I can give you another example, it's like being invited to the Queen for dinner, and Heston Blumenthal is cooking that evening, and when the food is prepared on the table, put on the table, and you can't wait for this feast to begin, someone ties your hands behind your back and you can't participate in the meal. The nutrients are there, but the roots aren't able to take them up through the soil. There was the modern agriculture had an answer to that. So they started something called a chemical fertilizer. When the vine can no longer gain what it needs through the soil, they introduced something called artificial growth agents called chemical fertilizers. Now, first it was applied on the soil, and secondly it was sprayed onto the leaves. Now, chemical fertilizer is nothing but a salt. If I give you a cup of salt to drink, what are you going to do? The first thing is you're going to go to the tap and you're going to drink some water. And the same is going to happen to a plant. If you cook cabbage or an onion in the pan, it will give you back all the water that you have given to it. We are forcing a plant thus to take up more water than it actually wants to. So this, and this is very important, by doing this, we are inviting nature to restore the balance of the excess water by introducing something like a disease. And in this case, it's a fungal disease, oidium, mildew, botrytis, and so on. So biodynamics treats these diseases as an imbalance. They see it as a weakness, microbes, fungi, viruses, etc. So it's because of an imbalance. We shouldn't remember that fungi, and in this case, oidium or botrytis, is really seen as executors or cleaners of the nature system. It's like crabs scavenging on the bottom of the ocean floor, living on things that are anyway half dead. So we have to treat them by treating the imbalance. Now, nature had another answer on this. So the third door for the problem was opened, and it's called systemic herbicides. Now, this is a real problem because now we spray something onto the vine that is absorbed into the sap to immediately decrease the symptoms of any disease. We shouldn't forget that sap is the connection between the roots and the fruit that we will eventually drink as wine. So what are we left with? We're left with an abundant harvest, lots of wine, lots of grapes, but it comes from a very weak soil that is a weak expression of the climatic conditions. And we are using technology in the cellar to rectify this and forever playing catch up. So it really speaks very little of our initial AOC definition. I'm hoping that it starts to make sense. If we think about the climate consists of three main factors: rain, heat, and wind. And there's multiple variations of those three every year. And never is a vintage identical to the other one. Each year, the vine is imprinted with the chaos of that year's climate, of that year's weather. So the variations, they intertwine. Rain can be either early or late this year, heat the same, it could be abundant or sparse, but these three factors are intertwined to affect the soil, the mycorrhiza, the microorganisms, and photosynthesis eventually. So we can say that grapes are basically an image of the climate and the life in the soil. Now, finally we can start with where are we going with biodynamics. Bio means life, and dynamics means an enhancement, a stimulation, or an acceleration of life. This concept was started in 1924 in Germany, in a town called Koberwitsch, at the Count and Countess of Kaiserling. And this guy, Rudolf Steiner, he gave very precise suggestions to increase the plant health, to increase the taste of food, not only grapes, and to improve their nutritional qualities. He was a philosopher with a BSc background. Now, the concepts of biodynamics seems to be very difficult for people to understand with a scientific background. And I can understand that because we have been taught at universities in a very specific way to think, where biodynamics requires us to think also in another way. What is very funny for me also is that in those days, if you were a philosopher, they used to take portraits of you with this angle, as if they're really trying to depict you as thinking. Okay, So Rudolf Steiner said that we should see a farm as a whole, as a living organism in its own right. He said that we should still, when we practice biodynamics, still respect and consider the biological cycles, for example, of the season, like any conventional farmer does. But he also said that we should consider the dynamic, the metaphysical, and the spiritual aspects of a farm to bring, and here's the word, to bring balance between what you can see and what you cannot see. He said that we should see ourselves, our farm, as part of a bigger picture. Johan farms in Stellenbosch. On his farm, he is in Stellenbosch. He sees himself as a bigger picture, as part of the Western Cape, as part of South Africa, as part of the world, as part of the solar system, and as part of the cosmos. And so the rules that applies to the cosmos also applies to Johan on his farm. And these rules are gravity, magnetic fields, energy, and the solar system. Can you see we are moving away from sorcery and Harry Potter stuff? This is called astronomy. Astrology deals with the effects of these things on events and people, where astronomy is not. It's physical thing, not physical, but it's stuff that we can, there's a study of that. The point is that plants don't just grow because the soil is fertile. Plants don't just grow because the soil is fertile. They grow because of rhythms and of energy. Rudolf Steiner also believed that the soil is getting older. And when a soil is getting older, when the earth ages, the soil becomes weaker and less accessible to the cosmic rhythms of the earth. And he felt that something must be done to reawaken, to resuscitate, to invigorate, to refresh, to revitalize, to bring life back to the soil, so that the cosmic energies of the earth can flow through the earth. The cosmic energies of the solar system can again flow through the earth and give new life. But the answer of this aging earth of modern agriculture was a more chemical approach, and obviously you can understand that he was against that. I'll give you a second to read that one. So he was obviously against this kind of chemical approach because he said that life can only be passed on by the living. So he was very much against it. He wanted to grow a product that is healthy and that sustains life. Now we all know that farmers grow a product that it first of all gives life and it provides us with energy. And these products that the farmer grows were influenced and dependent on the cosmic energies, which comes from a living, healthy soil. Don't you agree that we are what we eat? Don't you agree that the food that we eat influences our thoughts and our interactions with others? Sure you do. Don't you teach your children not to eat junk food, but eat your fish and eat your green stuff? People often ask, is biodynamics a science? What's the definition of science? Science applies scientific reasoning to identify a truth that can be proved with scientific logic. But so we use very precise, objective, and quantifiable things to measure stuff. And that is our answer in terms of truth for science. But biodynamics also speaks of another world. It speaks of that of intuition, of instinct, of analogical thoughts, of symbolic reasoning, the world that is used by artists and poets. Actually, I see we've got the art director of the Mad Max movies in the conversation. He's the guy that made all those big machines, those big cars that worked with Charlize Theron. So he's interested in a talk like this. So biodynamics speaks to symbolic reasoning, the world of artists and poets. Just because you can't prove something does not mean that it doesn't exist. Now, I love this next slide. This guy worked on the laws of nature. He worked on gravitational pull, on the speed of light, on the general theory of relativity. He worked on quantum physics. And what did he say in his last days? The only really valuable thing is intuition. Let's get back to the planting calendar. Biodynamics works on a planting calendar that is based on rhythms. We are all dependent on rhythms, whether you've ever thought about it or not. If you have to wake up at 6 o'clock every morning to go to work, After 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, you don't have to set your alarm anymore. You will wake up by nature 2-3 minutes before 6 o'clock. Now that is a rhythm. That's an example of a rhythm. Now everything that sustains life on earth is subjected and sustained by rhythms, frequencies, and energies. Now we might not be aware of our solar system every day. For most of us, our daily awareness of the solar system is the sun. In fact, ironically enough, it's the absence of it. We become most aware of the sun when it's not there anymore. When it's a cloudy day, we miss it because it brings us comfort. Then some of us are to a certain extent maybe also aware of the moon, only especially when it's full. And that for most of us is the extent of our awareness of the solar system. The word system, when I say solar system, we should treat the word system and think of something that mutually interacts, like your body is a system. We should treat the solar system almost like a living organism, because like organs in a body that all contribute, and this has a profound effect on us. Now the forces of life, now this is important, the forces of life don't belong to matter itself, but to a very complex world of energies and wavelengths. It is the same energy that we send to a robot on Mars that a few seconds later performs a task. Solar energy arrives to the Earth via frequency. Like earthquake, to give you an example, an earthquake is not just two tectonic plates that moves, and a smile is not just two lips that stretches. What is more important and significant to know is the person that smiles. Now, the world of energy, there's a world of energy behind the world of matter. And I think the best example to explain this or to witness this is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is nothing but sunlight and heat comes through the air in a watery solution which the plant uses, and it provides us with carbohydrates that is stored in grapes, which we make wine from. But no, not all frequencies are positive. Some are pretty negative. And these, for example, are high tension cables, mobile phones, Wi-Fi, antenna. So we are faced with a situation where man-made frequencies are interfering with the natural life-generating frequencies of the solar system. Let me give you another example. Those of you who's got friends as a real estate agent, there's always one home in about 100, one in about 60 to 100 that doesn't sell. Why? Because they are built and located in places of negative energy. And some people have retained this sensitivity, and it's often women, but not always. And this makes you feel either better or worse about a house. And if you spend too much time in a place where you don't feel well, you can become ill. We all know this. Now, our central nervous system connects us to a very physical world. It does not connect us to a world of energy from which life actually derives. We base all our physical matter, we base everything on physical matter. And so we cut ourselves off from another invisible world. For the past 200 years, we've only been studying the laws of science for the cerebral world. Speaking of frequencies, weight has no significance. Biodynamics does not work in quantities, but in energies. The same point, I can give you an example, is that Vodacom doesn't charge you for the use of your cell phone by the weight of its waves. Just like you don't receive your music on Spotify and your movies on Netflix by weight of the waves. Now here's another example. When you turn on your radio into a different to locate a certain program, what are you doing? You're changing the frequency. Now, why isn't that strange for us? Because we're used to it. This is an example of an energy organization. This is called, you can Google it, it's called sensitive crystallization. It's where we use copper chloride in a combination with water in a humidified area to form a crystalline structure to identify the various forces that is present in any product. Now, you can even analyze your own blood, or it could be wine, or it could be whatever. Here on the left-hand side, you can see it forms a very good crystalline pattern. This is unrefined sugar. Here we have brown sugar, and here we have white refined sugar. This is a biodynamic wine and the life forces after 9 days. What is interesting to see, it seems that it almost gets better from day 2 to day 7, where it starts to only deteriorate 9 days after opening. This shows you that the biodynamic wine is resisting the negative forces of oxidation, the destructive forces of oxidation. So you can almost see biodynamics as like the radio station for agriculture. And by just focusing on the plant itself is really like looking for the TV presenter inside the TV itself. So finally, I have arrived at a definition for you for biodynamics. It is the understanding of the laws of the physical world that is connected with the surrounding world of energies. Now, I'm only going to speak a little bit, not so much, but I am going to talk about the biological, the biodynamic calendar, and I'm going to refer to the planting calendar and the rhythms, and where does that come from. You all know that the Earth rotates on its own axis. Every day, it takes 24 hours, it creates day and night, or we can say hot and cold. The Earth also rotates around the sun. It takes 365 days or 1 year, and it creates the various seasons. This also we can see as hot and cold, and we have 2 intermediates, spring and autumn. Thirdly, and this is important, the moon rotates on its own axis in the same time it rotates around the Earth, and this takes about 27 days. Now, this class is actually for my final year students. They're all listening, and they would have wanted me to repeat this last sentence. I know that. I'm going to say that again. So the moon rotates also on its own axis in the same time it rotates around the Earth. Guys, that's why we are always seeing the same side of the moon, if you've never wondered, because it rotates at the same time. A fourth thing that we should remember is from our position on Earth, where we are standing, we can also see the moon moving higher and lower up in the sky. Now, as the moon moves past the planets and the constellations, the zodiac constellations is nothing but a set group of stars. And the planets and the zodiac constellations also express themselves in one of the 4 principal ways that's got a strong connection with either earth, water, light, or heat. And they all have one dominating characteristic. There are 12 constellations, as you will see in this picture. And as the moon moves past either one of the 12 constellations, it spends either, in terms of Aries, a very short amount of time in front of that constellation, or Pisces, a longer time in front of that constellation. And this difference is between 1 and 4 days on average, because if the moon's rotation takes 27 days, and there are 12 constellations, it takes on average between 1 to 4 days. Now I'm going to give you an example. Let 3 zodiac signs, Aries, Lion, and Ram, they give strong heat impulses, which represents the fruiting forces, which represent grapes. We also have 2 planets that strongly relates to heat impulses. Those are Mercury and Saturn. Mercury has got a very short orbital. Its rotation is less than 1 year, less than the Earth, where Saturn has a very long rotation. 1 year for them is about 30 years for our planet. Now, when a warm planet moves in front of a heat constellation, their combined effect is magnified. So this means that the fruit of the vine will be enhanced. It would be a good idea for harvesting. This is the principle. So we are only respecting the rhythms to help the plant express itself better. I'm going to give you one example of a biodynamic preparation. Let's take the chamomile, for example. We all know that chamomile plays a big role in digestion. Whether you believe in biodynamics now is irrelevant, because biodynamics, whether you believe in it or not, it's irrelevant. We know you drink chamomile tea because it's good for your digestion. More precisely, it's very good for your intestines. Second thing that we know is that animals are superior to plants. Plants are subject to animals. Thirdly, we know that animals internalizes their world in organs, in their respiratory, digestive, cerebral organs. And this gives them autonomy to eat and drink and sleep and walk when they want and where they want. The fourth thing that we know is that animals has got a powerful effect on plant growth. For example, manure. What is manure? What is animal manure? It is nothing but vegetable matter that has passed through the digestive system of an animal's metabolic forces. I'll say that again. An animal has got a powerful effect on plant growth. Let's take manure, for example. Manure is nothing but vegetable matter that has passed through the digestive system of an animal's metabolic forces. Now, for biodynamics, they have chosen the animal with the most sophisticated digestive system, the biggest ruminant on earth, which is a cow. By the way, a cow is seen sacred in ancient religion and also in Christianity, for example, not to bring in religion, but to, like, for example, an ox is more superior to a donkey. Now, when we place, the principle is that we place chamomile inside an intestine of this ruminant, a cow. We bury it in spring, we dug it up, we bury it in winter, we dug it up in spring, we add it to the manure, we dynamize it in water to increase the level of energy, and we spray it onto the soil. So we are just using what is already sophisticated, and we are aligning that. We are not manipulating. We can talk about this concept a little bit more, but on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis, we have hot and we have cold forces that is activated towards Earth or towards the sun. I'll give you an example. At night, the forces are towards the Earth as it is more cold. In the morning, the sun comes up and the forces are levitated towards the sun. That's a daily example. Seasonal, we have winter and we have summer, for example. So in the mornings, it facilitates upwards, and in the afternoon, it is the other way around. So that would favor work, for example, that should be done in the soil. You'll find it funny, but I only have three slides based on the cellar, because a lot of these principles are happening in the vineyard and not so much in the cellar. If we think about the cellar should be seen as like a midwife. It's just helping things to take its proper course. Because when you have allowed, this is important, when you have allowed the grape as a product of nature, without toxic and artificial chemical fertilizers, your vineyard is well situated. You have grape varieties that are well adapted. The cellar is seen where only very basic activities like racking, lee stirring, pressing, and so is conducted. One can really sit back, not entirely sit back and do nothing. It's not what I'm saying. We can really admire how the product has come to this process at this point in the cellar. But let me give you another scenario, which is more common in our world. Let me sketch this one. Perhaps you have a vineyard where the soil cannot nourish the roots, where the leaves have received foliar fertilizers, where chemical salts have been sprayed onto the vine, where toxins and poisonous substances are situated inside the sap, where the vine keeps on growing, where it should actually stop, where the leaves must be removed so that it helps ripening, where the bunches tend to rot and you spray it 3 or 4 times for fungal infections. There, can you understand that there's an imbalance in the juice, which will result as an imbalance in the wine? And the winemaker is forever going to play catch up. He's going to introduce new technologies to combat his current situation, because he's got something that he needs to rectify. I find that many winemakers are using amphora nowadays and clay pots and concrete vessels, and they don't even know why. They don't know the history, and they don't know the principles of it. Winemakers have been phoning me and say, where can I get those clay pots? And I'm like, why do you want to use it? They said, no, but everyone's making wine in clay pots nowadays. But it's a sad situation where we don't even know why. We know that yeast converts sugar into alcohol. Now, if you are not practicing the principles of biodynamics, you could see fermentation temperature as very problematic. But if you have respected the laws of nature, fermentation is just a factor that the grapes use that will bring it another type of expression. Fermentation, you can almost see like a fever. It is in search of a new balance. Okay, I'm almost done. I just want to, something that I found really interesting is the shapes of a barrel. Now, shapes and forms also have a frequency. And like, for example, an arch in a church opposes gravity. You all know the types of churches with the architecture in the Roman churches where you have the arch, where it opposes gravity. And a barrel can actually be seen as a type of permanent arch. Those of you who have climbed inside a barrel, maybe a 225 is too small, but climb into a 600-liter stockinger or into a foudre. The first time you climbed in there, haven't you found that it automatically puts a smile on your face? There is something about the frequency of a barrel of that shape that just does something. Now, the shape of a barrel is significant to its position. At the bottom picture here, I have barrels from Burgundy. Bordeaux is slightly more elongated. And here I have barrels, these are pipes from Portugal, and puncheons, which is sherry barrels from Spain. They look very similar. And I wonder if you have ever wondered, where does the shape come from? Why are the barrels in Portugal and Spain more longer and elongated? And why are the barrels of Bordeaux and Burgundy more shorter and more fat, with Burgundy being the shortest and the fattest? This has got to do with the Middle Ages, of the position of the position of the church. Now, let me give you some quick background. This is the second last slide. In France, during the Middle Ages, there were a lot of monks. The monks needed to construct a Roman church, and they needed to do it pretty quickly because they wanted to put relics in the church so that when pilgrims from other monasteries moved to that specific area, they can pray in front of the relic and bring money. But the monks didn't know how to build the church. They didn't have that experience. And in France in those days, you had to be initiated to be able to build the church. And those people were called companions. You would have the wood companion, the stonemason companion, and so on. And they would put together the church. So what they would do is they would put a stick of a certain length in the middle. They will wait for the summer solstice. The rising sun of the summer solstice will then cast a shadow at exactly 9 o'clock. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where the stick is still planted, the setting sun of the summer solstice will cast a shadow. They will connect the two lines. They will then wait for the winter solstice. Obviously, in northern and southern hemisphere, it's completely the other way around. The winter solstice. They will cast a shadow, and it will cast a shadow for both of them, summer solstice and for the winter solstice. Now, this means that the size of the church would then be very specific to the place. And the church would, because of the summer and the winter solstice, it would face exactly east. So in the south, like for example, the Portugal pipe and the Spanish puncheon barrels, the lines in the south, the lines are more narrow because there's shorter difference between the summer and the winter solstice as it's closer to the equator. In the north, it would be wider because it would be shorter, and the barrel therefore would be shorter. But however, the proportions remain the same, which is the history about the barrels from Burgundy, Bordeaux, Portugal, and Spain. Last thing I want to say about this is that France has always been seen as a wood-producing country. Still it is. The forests of Vosges, Limoges, Tronçais, Allier, and so on. Where Italy is a clay or a soil, lots of clay in the regions of terracotta. We all know the tiles from Italy. Italy is a clay-producing country, so they made amphora. That's why they are so known for amphora and barrels from France. This was now a very long talk, and I'm ready to conclude this conversation by saying that the road to real and authentic wines will see producers with varying levels of commitment. That's a fact. And it's normal to hear those wanting to get on board with this new market of biodynamics to say that yeah, I've converted 95% organic and 95% biodynamic. But a woman is not 95% pregnant. She's either pregnant or she's not pregnant. And in biodynamics, the matter, the plant, is never the mold. It is only the content of the mold. The vine is a living thing, and people believe that it fulfills its nature automatically, but it's not true. We can say that life is born from matter, and it's not the other way around. It really isn't. I think the time has come that we must respect nature and that we must try and understand it better. And this makes me wonder, would we be having this conversation online if animals and nature was not disrespected and not mistreated and animals not trafficked illegally? Would we have the problem of bird flu, for example, if birds were not reared in such horrendous conditions? My last sentence is that I think it's time for the truth. I think it's time that the consumer knows the truth and is aware of this. After all, the consumer rules, and it's them that buys your wine. And I just think that it's just right to tell the full truth. And what if the consumer changes his purchasing habits when he hears the truth? So biodynamic is a way of offering consumers something towards the direction of the truth. And doesn't that lead to a real, authentic, site-specific, terroir, AOC-driven wine? Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed that. For more content like this, check out the YouTube channel. That will be posted there for free and all to watch. If you are perhaps studying towards a diploma in WSET level 4, or you are studying towards the program of Master of Wine, and you need some advice or some private lectures on international wines or some technical concepts on the winemaking process or even viticulture, you can send me an email on lgwines@gmail.com and we will be in contact.